because this is I guess a recommendation that we've been pushing since last year and also this year, and most recently, if you're following, as us three would follow, we have to follow Parliament very closely. So they most recently said in Parliament like a few times that they would be maintaining a moratorium on executions and that there are no plans to do away with it. But I guess even though it's a government policy and a policy can be, I guess a decision can be reversed, so that doesn't mean that it's set in stone. So, we were discussing or recommending like, what if we got rid of all the ways in which executions could be done so that it's harder to restart executions if one day the government decides to change their mind to restart executions again. But for now, we're feeling confident.
Thank you. I don't want to take up too much time, but I do have one last question for all of our panelists here. And maybe this can be a bit of a rapid fire, like keep it short, maybe 2 minutes. I just wanted to know, what are you looking forward to in 2024 in each of your respective areas of work? So, Dinesh, you want to go first? Freedom of expression.
Okay, I think for us, the goalpost hasn't moved, right? I think we've already set as an organization what are our goals that we want to achieve. It hasn't been moved. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of law and policy reform, in terms of building a whole set of research database for us, advocate better. I think that's what we need to be still doing. I think, but some of the things that we are looking forward to, a new area per se, for us to literally get our heads on together is the emerging tech of AI and its implications towards freedom of expression and how that impacts the newsroom as well. I think that's a really key area for us to really dig into, because the technology itself is really growing at a rate that we can't even keep up. But the thing is, I'm not trying to put fear into everybody's heads. It's not something is to be feared, it's to be embraced. But we just need to be a little bit cautious, right? I think we need to look at how these LLMs are sort of putting their data in a way that's in line with human rights standards, and also at the same time how to prevent all of this data to be as unbiased as it can be. Because even recently our government, like literally today, our government literally said they're going to use AI to sort of combat disinformation. And I don't know how that works, because it's like LLMs right now is not at a pace where it's going to be detecting all of these things immediately, because it's going to be biases, because the data literally is dependent upon human inputting into it, right? So how are you going to do that? So it's not clearly put out as usual. It's very vague with the government. But yeah, that's somewhere that we really need to look at. And yeah, I think that's what we as CIJ is trying to look for. I think the goalpost has not moved. We still have our priorities in terms of media as well. Thanks for reminding. Yeah, definitely those two things. So as CIJ, we definitely are pushing towards two things, which is the Malaysian Media Council and also the Freedom of Information Act. These two things are really, really important, which the government is still they are supposed to do it this year, but they are still trying to dilly-dally here and there, trying to do some gymnastics. What are they doing? I'm not too sure. But yeah, we will still put it in the back first. But yeah, so these are the sort of the focus areas that we are looking at.
Thank you. Janelle, why don't you tell us about police violence?
I will add one thing for freedom of expression. Although the government has said that they will not repeal or amend the Printing Press and Publications Act, but they did put out this survey. I don't know why, it doesn't make sense, but they put out a survey asking for input. I don't know what will come out of it, but that's something that I will be looking out for personally, to see what the government will actually do with the findings. So that's one.
Oh my God.
Generally speaking, UPR recommendation is another thing. So Malaysia has gone through its UPR session early January, exactly on typism. And the government would review their decision as to which recommendations they would accept, which recommendations they would reject in June this year. So if you're talking about torture, for example, which you can relate it back to violence and even, all forms of degrading treatment, right, including to some extent death penalty or even lifetime imprisonment. So we are rather looking forward, hopefully, that the government would say yes this time to ratifying the Convention Against Torture, because that's one of the lower hanging fruits. I will also add one, the peaceful assembly, sorry. So given the usual tactics that the government has been employing, technically copying from previous government administrations, we're definitely also looking forward to hopefully any changes in SOPs by the police in policing public assemblies. And if I remember correctly, the Home Minister did say something, I think in February, is it? Something about being open to receiving proposals to amend up. So hopefully something will come up. In terms of IPCC, what SORAM looks forward to will be more regular engagements with the Commission and to explore avenues to empower them in their mandate. Yep.
Thank you. Nicole, you want to speak about the death penalty now?
No, let's go. No. I think as I was talking about the statement, we're still, definitely looking forward to seeing the continued reduction of the use of the death penalty. But beyond that, again, just want to echo what Janelle said about, I think the government potentially making steps towards ratifying the UN Convention Against Torture, because that was really mentioned a lot during this recent UPR session. And it would also just cross-cut again across all our different issues that we're working on. And I think also just generally looking forward to what the Malaysian government, or I guess in this case Bayu, the Legal Affairs Division, is planning to do towards moving towards the full abolition of the death penalty. Especially what we're looking, I guess, in particular, they recently, or last year, they announced that they, meaning the Legal Affairs Division, announced that they were doing a study on studying the law on the sentencing of drug abuse offenses. So I think that could be a potential next step to, if we're still gonna do abolish the death penalty in stages or phases, then what if we work towards abolishing the death penalty for drug trafficking and drug use? So that's one of the things that we're looking forward to this year.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to open it up to the floor. Anybody who wants to ask any questions to our panelists, or Katrina is also seated right next to me. Maybe Katrina, you want to sit here, and then we can ask questions. So, anybody who wants to ask the first question? Yes, you can ask questions to Katrina as well. Amir, you had a question?
Hello. So in the context of LGBTQ rights in conservative country like Malaysia, right? How can policymakers fine-tune between ensuring human rights and keeping the majority content? Especially considering that democracy, the only way to cling to power is by pleasing the majority, and how there is no objective morality in the context of LGBTQ.
Is there anyone specific you wanted to ask this to, or just in general?
No, just
okay.
And just identify from which media house are you from? FMT. Okay, yes. Thank you for your question. So, if I understand correctly, the question is within the government stated context that in Malaysia LGBTI rights are not welcome, what then would be the responsibility or the tactic? I think it's a question that you're asking me about the government strategy to hold on to power, which is quite a different perspective on what the government's real obligations are, which are to protect rights. And I think that the governments that are brave, leaders that are brave, need to make difficult choices. And I think it is very easy for governments to scapegoat communities. So we see this where it is either LGBTI peoples or migrants and refugees that are thrown under the bus in the thirst for power. And this current administration, when they were in the opposition, they understood very well that in terms of naming the violations that happen to communities, and they used that to also gain confidence and trust of people in Malaysia. And so I think it's not just disappointing, but quite appalling that we will accept that for some peoples in this country, there should not be rights, when actually the basis of fundamental human rights is that they are inherent and that they belong to all. I think that takes leadership, it takes human rights education, it takes speaking to communities around difficult conversations. I think if you think about racism, it is quite easy, for example, to say that, it is the norm in a particular country for the racial majority to hold power and norms, and therefore we should enable racism. Or as somebody for people with disabilities, we accept that most of us don't have disabilities, and therefore it is a waste of time to address disability rights. That cannot be the basis upon which we lead. It cannot be the basis upon which we make public policy decisions. And so how they choose to strategize, that's a political discussion for those in power, but we must not give even a single inch of compromise. It's not just human rights actors, but as journalists, as people in the country, because once we start enabling the questioning and doubts on our basic fundamental rights for any group of people, that leads to an immediate cascading and destruction of rights for all people.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Chen from Academic Society. My question is for Nicole. What would be the main barriers to the full abolishment of death penalty for Malaysia?
Great question.
Sorry.
So actually, before the laws were the bills were passed last year, this movement has been building over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And I think in 2018, it was the bill. There was a bill that almost passed, but they actually announced that they wanted to abolish the death penalty in full, but that got stopped because of a lot of resistance from victims. What do you call this? Yeah, victims of people who have been murdered, their family members. So they were very opposed to this because they felt that it doesn't reflect their sense of justice. So but it's not just them. So that's one of them. And there are also various actors within the Ministry of Home Affairs who sort of. There's resistance from them in that they want to maintain this the death penalty just in case. So there's always kind of a compromise that we have to do with the people who are against the full abolition versus people who want to abolish it in full. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks for that, Nicole, and thanks also, Shani, for the question. I think I just wanted to add to what Nicole said, is that with the death penalty, we see globally that it's one of those things where people think that they have very strong opinions about it, but then when they start to learn a little bit more about the death penalty, it is something that they change their mind on. And I think some of the barriers is that I don't think we've had very open and public conversations around what justice means. And so one can imagine that families of victims are seeking some kind of repair and justice. And in the absence of any other structure or claim, this is what they will go to. And yet we see in other countries where the death penalty has been abolished, or where they're still fighting, there have been some incredible movements of victims, family groups leading the charge for the abolition. Because they understand, for example, that if you are saying that, if I understand the horror of my family member being murdered, for example, they don't want that inflicted on somebody else's family. And so I feel some of the barriers are, again, the leadership question and the feeling that, oh, we cannot be strong on this because people don't understand. When I talk about state obligation, it's a very basic concept under international human rights law, not just to create infrastructure for the protection of rights, but there is a duty to actively promote rights, which means that the government has to create continuously spaces for people to come to an understanding of rights and shift public attitudes. So it was good that they're signaling that they're trying to move towards abolition with the mandatory death penalty, and Malaysia got lots and lots of praise at the Universal Periodic Review from the international community. My worry would be that they sit in that comfort of that praise, and our responsibility is to make sure that they don't.
Sorry, there's also, building on what Katrina said, there's also a 2013 Roger Hood study, which was an iconic study that actually, basically they studied what Malaysians felt about the death penalty, and they gave them situational, situations about, okay, if you were in their shoes, like, would you still be for the death penalty or against the death penalty? And surprisingly, the results from that found that actually a lot of people weren't actually for the death penalty when you were presented with those situations. So you can check out SWARM's latest 2023 annual report, which has this in the citation, and there's a whole chapter about the mandatory death penalty in that, so check that report out as well.
Hi, thank you very much. For those of us who work with migrant and refugee justice, I know you've spoken a little bit about detention, but I'm wondering if you monitor about the positive obligations of states, such as the right to health, a right to dignified work, and a right to education at least. Are you monitoring that, and where do you see the Madani government trend going forward?
So I'll say from Amnesty Malaysia, we don't monitor those specific areas of rights, and so I defer to colleagues who have been working on it a bit closer, and Dr. Subha, if you also want to add, please feel free to do so. I think I will say though, just sort of monitoring the overall trends, and the point that I made in my presentation around how even though we, in this report, so the Malaysian section is what, 900 words? It's very small, and you can imagine it's 155 countries, so purely a function of space and structure more than what is most important. I noted the continuous harassment of migrants and refugees, the lack of justice, and the state violence that is imposed, and also when it comes to freedom of expression and so forth. But to connect that to other issue areas. And last year and in previous years, what we saw, so arrests of migrants and refugees don't happen in a vacuum. They happen also fostered by xenophobic and racist and classist attitudes. And so if we understand that, then one can also imagine what the knock-on effects are to the claiming of other fundamental rights of migrants and refugees. So for example, with the right to health, we know that if you do not protect the right of refugees or migrants to freedom of movement, if documentation becomes the main thing that supersedes your access to basic rights, that has a direct link to threatening one's right to health. And we saw with in education, the crackdown or the raids that happen in communities and where they run informal education centers, and the implications then on the denial of just the most basic education for children. So while we don't have statistics on that, I would strongly urge everybody, even with the little snapshots that we gave, that you're then picturing, okay, if this is the reality, if somebody who's a migrant or refugee faces that risk of harassment when they step out, that's going to limit their right to dignified work. It's going to affect how they seek redress when they're facing labor rights violations, because the employers will use the Immigration Act to threaten them and to keep them silent from seeking justice.
Dr. Subha, I can definitely read so Adrian's chapter, so Adrian from NSI, he wrote an extremely long chapter on migrants and refugees. So, I mean, there are no statistics per se, but it just quite comprehensively capture the various areas when it comes, or rather issues when it comes to migrants and refugees. So I can definitely attest to the actually increase. I can't tell by how much because I didn't do documentation, but from the news that I've been consistently coming across last year, it seems that there might have been quite a big of a crackdown in terms of raids that leads to mass arrest of undocumented migrants. That's one that I've noticed. When it comes, and this chapter also does highlight some of the continuous issues. So one of it, of course, I think you'll be aware, the lack of equal labor rights for domestic workers. So this continues to highlight this systemic issue. When it comes to refugees, so this is something that would be notable especially. So the Home Minister last year did imply some sort of consideration for granting rights to work and also I think healthcare for refugees, but after that mention that sort of disappeared. One thing to definitely track, and this is something that Asylum Access and also relevant NGOs would be looking at in conjunction with the Universal Periodic Review. So essentially, right, for the UPR recommendations that Malaysia has received from countries this year, refugees and asylum seekers, migrants more or less consistent number of recommendations. But what was, I think, notable is actually access to legal remedies. So that mention has increased in recommendations given by countries, and we all know that when it comes to access to legal remedies, that's very much lacking among migrants, and we see that with the arrest of Bangladeshis just walking the long way to get access to justice. For refugees, what's very notable is that one, refugees and asylum seekers overall as a group, recommendations directed about them has actually experienced a huge spike. I think more than half, I think, by recommendations in percentage. And many of the countries have actually recommended Malaysia to have a comprehensive policy framework to manage them, including granting rights to work, education, and healthcare. So, and it's very important to note as well the government's narrative in the Universal Periodic Review itself, whereby they were relatively quite defensive. I can't remember the specifics, Katrina might be able to quote on, I can't remember that, but you might be able to add on. But essentially the government was very, basically they were not, I don't think they were quite keen, right, on granting, and based on informal engagements with certain government ministries, it looks like they might have taken a relatively hardline stance. So I think it would be relatively important to see what the government's response towards the UPR recommendations related to refugees are this June.
I'll just add really briefly something else that reminded me, and that data and statistics, we live in a country where this is incredibly inaccessible. And I think that, when my colleagues are talking about doing monitoring, it's almost against all odds that we're trying to get data. And actually it is our right to that information. And so in terms of recommendations to the government, in order to make data accessible and disaggregated and regularly published openly and not for the privilege. Also in terms of how we track impact. And so when you talk about human rights, again, the government's obligations, they should be keeping track of their records and policy developments. I think on your point on refugees, so if you watched the Universal Periodic Review presentation by the Malaysian delegation, they made a few very appalling comments about refugees. And I won't go into detail, but I'll just say in terms of my comment that we need to read this Malaysian report in the global context. There has been a real erosion of refugee rights and norms on refugee protection globally. And it is distressing to me that when a country is being reviewed at the international level, at the highest level on their human rights record, that they feel comfortable making appalling statements about some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And that, again, is a call to action for all of us to not let them be so comfortable in doing so.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid that that's all the time that we have today. But if you have a question that you didn't manage to ask, our panelists, Katrina and everyone will still be around. Do feel free to just approach us after the session. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists? Thank you so much for the incredible work that you guys are doing. Okay, just a quick note before everybody adjourns. We actually have a solidarity action that we were hoping that we could all take together before we leave. I just wanted to invite my colleague Christina to talk us through it, and we'll be able to take it together. Oh yeah. If you enjoyed the dinner today, that was prepared by Chef Jawad, who is a Palestinian refugee living in Malaysia. If you would like his contact and support his business, you can approach one of us and get it from us. I also just realized that I didn't introduce myself. My name is Seshan. I am the communications officer, so to members of the media here today, if you'd like to exchange emails or contacts, please come see me. We do have a Malaysia press release, which I emailed out earlier today, but if you'd like a copy of it, I'll be able to send it to you. There is still leftover food outside, so please do help yourself before you go. And final reminder, please do not circulate this report today. Tomorrow morning you can expect it in your inbox, and you can, yes, by 8 a.m. and you can help us circulate it then. Don't forget to tag us. Okay, Christina.
Hello. Okay, it's alright that I just start from here. Hi, I'm Christina, the campaigner from Amnesty Malaysia. I'll talk to you about two global campaigns that we're working on right now on two issue areas. So one in Sudan and one in Palestine. So as my colleagues in London have already mentioned, the ongoing conflict in Sudan, as a brief overview, between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, has left over 14,600 people killed nationwide and over 8 million people disabled, including nearly 2 million of them seeking refuge in neighboring countries. So we're calling on an arms embargo in Sudan right now to contribute to the protection of civilians. And in Palestine, Israel's ruthless bombardment continues to kill Palestinians in Gaza at a staggering rate. Over 28,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed in 4 months, and over 60,000 people have been wounded, including thousands left permanently disabled. And we are just demanding a ceasefire to end civilian suffering. An immediate ceasefire by all parties to end civilian bloodshed and ensure humanitarian aid access to Gaza. So if you would like to be part of it, we're taking a solidarity action photo with some placards that have been prepared. If you are willing and consent to be part of our action, to be shared on social media and so on and so forth, please gather down here. So people upstairs as well, please come downstairs if you would like to be part of this action. Oh, I'm so sorry. So we have some placards.